Here.
Mr. Talbert?
Here.
Mr. King?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Wasson?
Here.
Can we stand for an invocation? Mr. Pam Lobel has kindly offered to say a prayer.
Heavenly Father, thank you tonight for that we live in a state and parish where we can get together and we can go before you. We just ask that you be with everyone here up front this evening. Just let us do things that will be pleasing in your eyes, Lord, to help us all to be a little better each day for you. Just that's all we can do. None of us are perfect, but we can all head in that direction. Just we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Can we face the flag for a pledge, please? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you happen to have any cell phones, please mute them or turn them off, either way. Tonight, we will have public input on any meeting, on any item. If an item comes up and the public wishes to address any specific item, please raise your hand. You'll be acknowledged, given the floor by the chair. Please try to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. We'll start off tonight with presentations. We have a couple presentations tonight. I'd like to start off with something that's very passionate to a lot of people. Across the entire world today, there has been plastered on the world news a major event that has taken place in Livingston Parish. Tonight, I have asked Miss Amber Stuver, a master and a PhD in physics from Pennsylvania State University, currently holds dual appointments with Caltech University as a data analysis and as an EPO scientist at LIGO Livingston. Miss Amber, would you please come to the microphone and, if you don't mind, and take just a moment and tell us if it is true, though it might be only 20 milliseconds ahead, is it possible that Livingston Parish is the first recollection recording since the history of Earth to record a gravitational wave from space?
The LIGO observatories in Livingston Parish, as well as the partner observatory that is in Hanford, Washington, both observe the very first direct detection of gravitational waves.
And the one that got it first was?
Us.
Would you take just a moment and tell us, while the world is watching right now and everybody's anxious to hear about Albert Einstein's theory, I think it was what, 1915? Is that when it was? Or?
So in 1916, Albert Einstein predicted the existence of these gravitational waves, which was really just a propagating change in the gravitational force that very large masses create as they move around with large accelerations. Einstein predicted these, but he was unsure whether or not these truly existed. It may have been an artifact of imperfect mathematics. After all, calculus was invented just to do physics. It could be that there are refinements to be done to mathematics. And even if they did exist, he didn't think humanity would ever be able to detect these gravitational waves, because by the time they arrive at Earth, they are so incredibly small that he didn't believe we would have the technology to detect them. He died in 1955. On September 14th of 2015, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory in Livingston Parish measured a gravitational wave that changed the length of its 4-kilometer long arms. That's very near 2.5 miles. It changed the length of those arms by less than 1/1000th the diameter of a proton. We detected these changes in length, and by analyzing the signal that came through measuring these changes in length, we discovered that we had seen for the first time not only a gravitational wave, but a gravitational wave coming from a black hole pair that were orbiting each other, and right before they merged to become one black hole, were traveling over 60% the speed of light before they merged. The overall signal lasted less than 1/2 of a second. Our data analysis methods alerted us within 3 minutes, and ever since then we have been vetting our data to make sure that we truly did see a gravitational wave, so we would know that we are telling you the truth.
Thank you so much, Ms. Amber, and I appreciate you taking the time today to come speak to us. And, you know, I think about the great things that have happened in history, such as the Wright brothers, and, you know, as time goes on, these things become in history book of where these things taking place. And I just believe there'll be a time in history in the future that Livingston Parish will be recorded. So thank you for partnering with is it the National Science Foundation?
We're funded by the National Science Foundation.
And a lot of other corporations. So thank you again for coming and giving the presentation tonight.
Thank you all.
The next presentation we have is Mr. Gary Williams with We Honor Veterans. Mr. Gary, would you come to the microphone, please?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me here, and distinguished council members. On behalf of We Honor Veterans, my name is Gary Williams. I represent a company called Clarity Hospice. Clarity Hospice is addressing a concern that's not worldwide, but is impacting our nation. Every day we have more and more citizens that are heading to what we call the golden years. The baby boomers are getting older. Aside from that, statistics show that 1 out of 4 folks that are passing in our society are veterans. There's a nationwide program called We Honor Veterans, where not just our hospice, but all hospices, if selected, can participate in that program. And what it's doing is addressing those that are at end of life. And as such, as a company, we're in the Livingston Parish area. We're reaching out to citizens, auxiliary organizations, yourself today. And what we're doing is educating folks on what hospice is. And many of you are aware of what home health or hospice is in the community. But what Clarity and how Clarity Hospice is defining itself is they've stepped up to the plate. Our owner is a child of a veteran and comes from a large veteran family. As an organization, we hire a lot of veterans from the community, and we're doing a lot to reach out to them. Just some quick statistics to go over. 26 million veterans are alive today. 25% of all deaths that take place right now in America are by a veteran. More than 1,800 veterans die daily. The VA takes care for less than 5% of these folks, and more than 95% of these folks are taken care of in community. And of course, you've probably all seen that in your churches or by physicians and so forth. Probably the biggest passion of my heart as a veteran is to see to it that these veterans get their benefits and get their resources. Only 33% of all veterans know of their benefits and are even enrolled in VA benefits collectively. So how are we making a difference as a company and in your community here in Livingston Parish? Aside from going out and doing pinning ceremonies and certificates and so forth, our heart and passion is to make sure that we bring the resources to the family. We're doing this by gathering information, working with federal VA officers, working with state VA officers, and collecting resource packets that when a family comes to us or comes to hospice, we give them resources, not just a website. We actually reach out to them. So that's pretty much all that we do as far as that is concerned. Any questions from the council members on either hospice or We Honor Veterans program? I'm going to leave some information for each of you too, so that you can read it, bring it back to your auxiliary organizations, your churches, and for that matter, your family members. Because like a famous person once said a long time ago, there's two things that are guaranteed in life. That's death and taxes. So thank you, appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Mr. Gary. Thank you very much. Next, we have a presentation by Mr. Tommy Milazzo. Is Mr. Tommy here? I know he was on the agenda, but I guess he didn't make it. We'll pass that. I would like to make a comment. This is for, just for everyone's benefit. We've received 2 permits, I believe, today. One is for the new Burger Smith that will be opening at Jubilee Crossing Monday. And also, my favorite, we received a permit today for the new Movie Tavern, which will probably be opening in about 2 weeks. So if you get a chance, you might want to make sure we hit that one. The next item on the agenda is number 8. It's for the adoption of minutes for January the 14th and January 28th of this year. I've spoken with Miss Sandy. She said we can take both of those up in the same.
Can we just do January 14th and the 28th next time?
No problem. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes for January 14th?
I'll move on 14.
Seconded by Mr. Shane Mack. Motion by Mr. Gary Talbert. Any discussion? Call for the vote, Ms. Sandy.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lovell? Mr. Akins?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbert?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Item 9, Parish President's Report. I know the Parish President is not here tonight, but I believe he has someone. All right, well, I think that got scratched as well. Deferred, that's right. We'll just table that one until the next meeting then. Is there item 10 for the Planning Commission? Mr. Sam DiGirolamo. Mr. Sam, if you want to take up item B.
Yes, sir, please, if I may, I'd like to move 11B up, because Ms. Tony with French Settlement, our mayor in French Settlement, would like to, she's got a little bit more personal thing she'd like to do tonight, so she, as well as her alderman or councilman or whoever you want to say, they are asking the parish to enter in a governmental agreement with them. I've mentioned this to Mr. Averitt, that's his district. I've talked to Mr. Moody, he said that the paperwork's in place. They want the parish to do their permitting and their planning and their reviews for their commercial property. So at this time, I wanted to ask you folks to consider, make a motion if you're in favor of, and Ms. Tony is in the audience if you want to ask her any questions. Yes, sir.
We're gonna get the revenue off the building permit,
Yes.
and we're gonna get the revenue on reinspection,
It's way I understand it, right?
and then that commercial person in French Settlement will still use Fort and Tablada to review.
Yes, yes.
And they'll be responsible to them for the fees, just like,
Just like
Okay.
the people do in the parish. Yes, sir.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Jeff Averitt, seconded by Mr. Tab Lobel, to enter into a cooperative endeavor agreement between Livingston Parish and the Village of French Settlement
Yes, sir.
for permitting. Any discussion? None being, would you call for the vote, Ms. Sandy?
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lovell?
yes.
Mr. Averitt?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbert?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Item A
Yes.
for,
Okay,
Curtis.
first on your agenda, Mr. Chairman, our Planning Commission, Curtis Cove. Curtis Cove is in Mr. Keene's district. It's a preliminary plat, it's subdivision with improvements. It's a recommendation of the Livingston Parish Planning Commission to approve the preliminary plat for Curtis Cove.
is there a motion by the council? Motion by Mr. Girlinghouse to approve the plat for Curtis Cove. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. King. Any discussion?
Can I ask Billy a question, or
Now's
maybe
the
Scooter
time.
wants to ask Billy a question?
Yeah, I see here that there's a 25-foot drainage servitude on the, I guess that'd be the north side of the development. It says reduced to a 15-foot servitude. Is that big, tell me something about that.
Billy Taylor with Macklin Taylor. Right now, there's a 25-foot servitude. We put it on there when we did the original design for Magnolia Farms right next door. There's really not a big ditch right there, so we're gonna do a drainage study and drainage plan. If there's anything there, we're gonna do subsurface drainage, which you only need a 15-foot drainage servitude, so we're gonna take care
So
of that.
that's why you did, okay.
Yes, sir. And that gives a little bit more room to build on.
Okay. It looks better too, yeah.
Sam, did you get the
Thanks.
first and second? Motion and second?
Mr. Girlinghouse made the motion and Mr. King made the second.
Any more discussion on being called for the vote, Ms. Sandy?
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lovell?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Item B.
Next on your agenda is Vincent Cove. This is in Mr. R.C. Bubba Harris's district. I think Mr. Bubba was at our planning commission meeting last Wednesday out on Highway 16 in the east side of South Point. It's a recommendation of the Livingston Parish Planning Commission to approve the preliminary plat for Vincent Cove contingent on construction in and out. We're gonna designate an area for them folks to come in and out with their construction, enter and exit, so it's a recommendation of the Planning Commission to approve it that way.
Motion by Mr. Harris, second by Mr. Jeff Ard. Any discussion? Ms. Sandy, would you call the vote?
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lovell?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes.
I think
Planning
that-
Department, I guess,
I
A.
think the next one is for Mr. Glenn LeBlanc, servitude revocation. Ms. Sandy, if you want to
The
read
introduction.
this for us, and I think the servitude was put in the wrong place and they want to move it.
I can read it by title. This will be proposed ordinance 16-02. Whew. A map showing re-subdivision of tract A1C and A1B of a certain 7-acre and 2.6-acre tract of land into tracts A1C1 and A1B1, and the revocation of a 40-foot servitude of access across a portion of tracts A1C1 and A1B1 located in section 4T8SR3E, Greensburg Land District, Livingston Parish, Louisiana, for Glenn LeBlanc being more particularly described herein. Oh, public hearing to be held March 10th at 6 p.m.
Where is this located?
Is it off of Vincent Road?
Yes.
Place where it's at. I looked at the map,
St. Marie Drive.
yeah, I know, but I just didn't know exactly where it was located. Anyway.
So this will be a
that's okay.
motion to call for public hearing and introduce the ordinance. Motion by Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Second by Mr. Girlinghouse. Any discussion?
Let's hear if there's a question. Mr. Eddie Idell,
I see him back there, but
do you know anything?
You have, Bubba, one of the.
you have a question? Because
Mr.
Mr.
You got a
Idell,
question?
I didn't, they have two St. Marie Drives, and don't they? One off of Bond Road?
I don't know if the second one.
Okay. I'll get with the engineer later, just find out exactly where it's at.
Eddie, they moved the servitude, that servitude was just to access tract A1B1 and A1C1 originally, right?
Here you go.
And they just moved it onto A1C1 to access A1B1 and getting it off of this other tract.
Yeah, that's correct. It looks like what they're doing is moving the servitude to the north side where the actual drive is located. And so they're removing the servitude that's located on
Okay,
the south.
so they're taking it off of that part, putting it where the driveway actually is.
Driveway actually is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, sir.
and again, the motion is just to call for a public hearing, so if there's a discrepancy, I mean, we'll have a public hearing the next, in March. So we have a motion and a second, any discussion? Ms. Sandy, would you call the vote, please?
Who made the motion in the second? Mr. Harris?
Mr. Harris made the motion and Mr. Girlinghouse second.
Okay. Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sam. Item number 12 is to set the speed limit on Morris May Road at 25 miles an hour. Mr. Jeff Avery.
Yes, that's a gravel road. It has no speed limit at this time. And they would like, well, those residents would like a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit on that road. It's a gravel road.
Okay. Is there a motion from the board? Motion by Mr. Avery. Second by Mr. Shane Mack. Any discussion? None being Ms. Sandy, would you call for the vote, please?
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lovell?
Yes.
Mr. Avery?
Yes.
Mr. Greenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Item 13, contemplated merger of the sewer districts 1 and 2. Mr. Gary Talbot's request.
Okay, currently, I don't know if anybody's been to a sewer district meeting. Sewer District 1 and 2 meet simultaneously. Sewer District 2 owns a sewer treatment plant and has employees. Sewer District 1 has customers. They don't have any employees, and they don't have a plant. They collect fees, pay back bonds, and pay Sewer District 2 a fee designated so much a customer to operate, to maintain their line and treat their sewer. In talking to the bond people, it would make more sense if we had one district. Sewer 2 has more money and is, I guess, more financially stable than Sewer 1. And so consequently, Sewer 1, their bond rates are higher. And so in merging the two, we would get better rates and ability to raise money. Am I correct, Jim, in saying that?
You are, and I wanted to make that point, Mr. Talbot, that I'll give you a great example of the duplication. Whenever we issue bonds for Sewer 1, we have to go through Sewer 2 and do a cooperative endeavor agreement between 1 and 2. And then there's a cooperative agreement between the district and the parish. You pay 2 bond commission fees because of that. And typically you're gonna pay double the rating. It's like doing 2 bond issues instead of 1. And there's fees that you're gonna duplicate and pay every time you do it. So it's a waste of money and time. And it's like you said, they meet in the same place on the same day, the same room. Much financially beneficial, and I'm your financial advisor, to merge those 2 districts.
And I mean, you're actually having to keep 2 sets of books. They're paying Randy Smith to keep a set of books for District 2, to keep a set of books for District 1. Now, I think the engineering's all done by 2 and paid by 2. If I'm not mistaken, am I correct, Eddie? Y'all just.
I think so.
And the legal counsel represents both, but all the billing's done through 2, and that's absorbed in the whatever the fee is, which I think is $16 a customer right now. I think $16 a customer of the money collected by 1 is then paid to 2 for the operation of the district in 1. So all this is an ordinance authorizing, this is a resolution authorizing us to merge. And then right behind this, we're gonna introduce an ordinance. That'll actually have to be an election of the people. And if it's not something that we as a council can decide, based on the information that the district got from Butler Snow, who outlined how they would have to proceed. So what we're asking is to pass this resolution that would allow us to set forth in motion the merging of Sewer 1 and Sewer 2. And this isn't gonna be a quick process. It'll happen hopefully sometime this year. But, we've gotta get the ordinance passed. They've gotta pass a resolution. We gotta get it set on an election hopefully in November, and then we'll move forward. But this is the first step in the process to trying to make Livingston Parish government a little more efficient.
So would you put that in the form of a motion?
I would like to make a motion to pass the preliminary resolution declaring the intent of introduction of ordinance amending the boundaries of sewer district number 2.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Scooter King. Any discussion? None being. Ms. Sandy, would you call for the vote?
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobell?
Yes.
Mr. Avery?
Yes.
Mr. Garlinghouse? Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Item B is an introduction of an ordinance amending the boundaries of Sewer District 2. I believe this is basically the same thing as just to start the ordinance process. Ms. Sandy needs to read.
This is an ordinance amending the boundaries of Sewerage District 2 of Livingston Parish, Louisiana, and providing for other matters in connection therewith. This proposed ordinance 16-03, Public hearing to be held March the 10th at 6 p.m.
Yeah, basically what this is gonna do is it's an ordinance, it's gonna change the boundaries. Sewer one's boundaries will remain the same, sewer two's boundaries will encompass sewer one. So that when the merger takes place, if the people support it, and it's, it's passed in the election, and then the ordinance is passed by the sewer districts to do it, sewer one will then become part of sewer two. At that point in time, probably an appropriate name that reflects more of the purpose of that time will be adopted. And, this is just, I've asked that we,
Introduce this.
introduce this ordinance.
Make a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Talbot, second by Mr. Girlinghouse. Any discussion? Call for the vote, Ms. Sandy.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Let's bring up the addendum. Well, Mr. Ryan, if you would be so kind, it was a resolution granting preliminary authority for the parish of Livingston, state of Louisiana, to issue and sell, deliver refunding bonds.
Are we doing OMV or sewer two first?
A,
They won
Oh,
the
and B.
14,
Okay.
the 4,450,000.
Okay, you have, these are two very similar transactions. You have outstanding debt. One is for the OMB building. It was issued,
what building did you say?
Office Motor Vehicles.
Oh, okay, OMB, okay.
This bill.
This building, they were issued in 2008. We can lower the interest rate. This is exactly like when you refinance your mortgage loan. If you have a mortgage loan that's outstanding at 6%, and you can go down to the bank right now and refinance your loan to 3.5%, you're gonna lower your monthly payment. The great thing about these are, let me I'll just tell you real quick about them. All this has to be approved by the bond commission. There are savings thresholds set by the state bond commission. If we can't meet those savings thresholds, you don't owe us anything. There's no fees, no nothing. Any savings that I talk to you about are net after all fees and expenses have been paid. So it's not a matter of we're gonna save this much money and then take half of it for the professionals. Everybody's fees are regulated by the state bond commission and to a larger extent by the Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission. So I don't tell my clients the same thing. The truth is nobody's gonna charge you any more, nobody's gonna charge you any less because the fees are all regulated. Typically what happens with these free fundings is we try to get all the paperwork done as quickly as possible. It usually takes about 3 months to get the paperwork done. And then we try to time the market. The markets have been moving with us very, very well since we started this process. The 10-year treasury is down from about a 190. I think today it was at a 150, which is phenomenal. So we're trying to go as quickly as possible. On this particular refunding, again, it's for this building on the bonds we did in 2008. Now these numbers are were priced on January 13th, so almost a month ago. So I expect if we could price these bonds today, the savings would be significantly higher than this. But on the OMB building, on those bonds, we can save about $200,000 or about 3.5% of your old debt would be wiped away. And again, that's after all fees and expenses are paid. That's net after everything's said and done. That's a good refunding. Typically, you want to hit a minimum savings threshold of 3%. You can get up to 3.5%, 4%. It's a good refunding. So there is no risk to you guys. Like I said, if we can't get the deal done, if we can't meet the state mandated threshold savings, we can't do the deal, and nobody gets paid anything.
Is there a motion for a resolution?
That's not the only thing we're doing here, though. Aren't we doing the bonds on?
That's the next item.
Next
though.
resolution.
That's the next item, unless you wanna take them up at the same
Oh,
time.
I thought they were in the same resolution.
Two. It's one for OMB and one for sewer two.
Oh, no, but there's an item down here that talked about unrestricted revenues with respect to the jail, and we're not addressing those at all. At the bottom of page 1, whereas any pledge of unrestricted revenues will be on a priority basis.
Yeah, what that's saying is that the bonds are parity bonds. So we're not putting, when we refund these bonds, we'll issue new bonds to pay off these old bonds. What we're saying is, we're not making these bonds a higher payment priority than any of your outstanding debt.
Okay, okay, I got you.
That's why it lists all the other debt.
Okay, okay, I understand.
You're just reassuring your other lenders that you're not saying, oh, and by the way, when we borrow this new money to pay off these old OMB bonds, we're gonna make them a higher credit than the jail bonds or the health unit bonds or
Okay.
these other bonds.
I understand. I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Talbot, granting preliminary authority for the parish to sell and deliver the name of these bonds. Second by Mr. Ard. Any discussion? Call for the vote.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, can I make one point real quick?
Sure.
I want to answer a question Mr. Talbot asked me before the meeting, and this is it's a great question. Gary asked me, why don't we just shorten the maturity instead of lower the rates? And you can do that. But the thing is right now your total interest and principal payment on these bonds is about $300,000 a year. And you're saving about a total of $200,000. And as you said, you know, we make payments every month, and the thing is, you make payments to John every month, and John puts them in the bank in the sinking fund. But John only pays those bondholders how many times a year? No, principal. Principal once a year. Right, so he only pays principal once a year, so the bonds are denominated in 1 year maturity, so you don't have 2, 3, 6 month bonds. So it's,
Unlike your house note where if you pay more quicker, that
it goes away, right.
you don't get that savings here on time, it's just, okay, I understand.
If we could get, you know, like a 6 or 7% savings, you'd be looking at having enough to wipe out a year's worth of principal.
Okay, that's all, I mean, I just wanted to be sure.
That was a great question.
I mean, I just wanted to be sure we weren't just, you know, saving money to spend more, you know what I'm talking about?
Can't do that.
Meaning that,
It's
well, I
against
mean,
the law.
you know, I mean, the taxing authority, I mean, they've got, you're getting X number of dollars from the state for OMV anyway.
Right.
And we're putting that in a fund, and then we're paying the note, so I wanted to be sure that we're not, you know, that the savings are gonna be real and not something that, you know, that at some point in time in the future, you know, we end up with a bunch of money and still a long-term debt. But I understand where you're coming from, so I'm good with this deal.
So item B is to authorize refunding for the sewer district 2 bond.
Right, and this is the, the first one you did, it's the resolution giving preliminary approval, because you all are the governing authority for those bonds. This is Sewer District 2. They're a political subdivision of y'all's, but anytime they borrow money or raise taxes, you all have to approve that. So they want to borrow money and do the same thing. They want to refinance their old bonds, lower the interest rate, and reduce their payment. Same rules apply to them. We got to meet savings thresholds. If we can't do it, there's nothing charged, nobody gets paid. The savings on that one, and again, these savings are about a month ago, which if we could do this today, rates are a whole lot better today. The savings on that one is about 1.5, which is about 5.5% of the principal and interest on the bonds would go away. And again, I expect that to be better because rates have really moved with us recently.
Yeah, I got a call today from Kyle Parker, who sits on that board, and asked that we support this resolution because it would be a tremendous savings to sewer too.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate all your hard work. Is there a motion from the board? Motion by Mr. Averett, second by Mr. Girlinghouse. Any discussion? None being, Ms. Sandy, would you call for the vote?
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you.
Next item is item number 14 is some board appointments. We'll start with Recreation District number 2. This item was requested by Mr. Gary Talbot.
Recreation District 2 has an appointment coming available on the 14th. And so I would like to, at this point in time, make a motion to appoint Mr. Chris Prescott to serve as a commissioner on Livingston Parish Recreation District 2.
Motion by Mr. Talbot, appoint Chris Prescott, second by Mr. Jeff Ard. Any discussion? Is that Charlie's?
Yeah, it's Charlie said.
No discussion? Call for the vote, Ms. Sandy.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard? Mr. Talbert?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Item B, Fire Protection District number 7. This was requested by Mr. Jeff Averett.
This is a reappointment. Mr. Donald Sibley and Mr. Jerry Parker. Just reappointments, and I'm gonna leave them both on the
Good.
board.
Good. Motion by Mr. Averett, seconded by Mr. Talbot. Any discussion? None being called for the vote.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse? Mr. Ard? Mr. Talbert?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Item number C, Gravity Drainage District number 1. Start with Mr. Bubba Harris.
I would like to reappoint a board member that's there now, David Provost.
Okay, so his
Right,
term
on the
starts,
board. Yes.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Harris to appoint Mr. David Provost. Second by Mr. Greenhouse. Any discussion? None being, Ms. Sandy, call for the vote.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbert?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Harris?
Bubba?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
I was reading something else here.
Item C, on the same one, Mr. Scooter King, I think you have one or two tonight.
Just one.
Just one, okay, go ahead.
That's what I was looking at.
Mr. Jim Benton's termed out at the end of last year, and I'd like to make an appointment of Mr. Robert Bourne to the Gravity Drainage District 1 Board.
Just about, okay.
Yeah, that's just that.
Motion by Mr. King. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Girlinghouse. Any discussion? Call for the vote.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbert?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Item D, Planning Commission, Mr. Maurice Scooter King.
Oh, that's me too. I'd just like to make a reappointment of Miss Kathy Long to the Planning Commission.
Okay. Motion by Mr. King,
I'll second it.
second by Mr. Talbot. Any discussion? Call for the vote.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel? Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbert?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Item 15 is add to amend the capital outlay project priority road list. This list is, roads need to be added on. I would like to say I've looked at some of the roads on this list, and the engineering firm that's evaluating these roads is doing a fantastic job, doing a great job. But I think Mr. Lobel has one he wants to add to the.
Yeah, Jack Allen Road, it's a lot of residents on there, but it's also a big cut-through road between 42 and 444, so that gets a lot of traffic. Needs some attention.
All right, we could probably take up all the roads unless there's some opposition. Can we just take them all at one time, Sandy?
I would like to point out too, on Sunset Lane, when I was gonna add, Sunset kind of veers around, turns into, I thought it was one road, but it's actually Ballard Roads, it's one,
So you
so
want
I need to add Ballard to
to
that.
Sunset, all
Yeah,
right?
to Sunset, as the mayor, Ellen pointed out to me.
All right.
So, but yeah.
Okay, you have one, Mr. Talbot?
Yeah, I got an email after the agenda came out from the homeowners association of Richmond Place. They would like to add 4 roads to the list. Chapel Hill Drive, Norfolk Drive, Destrehan Avenue, and Devereux Drive. Now, actually, one of those actually goes through their subdivision into another subdivision. So I told them I would add them to the list, so, and they can be evaluated by the engineer.
Yeah, they're doing a
Yep.
great job, I've seen it, it's really good. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to,
Motion by Mr. Talbot for all of these roads, second by Mr. Girlinghouse. Any discussion? None being, Ms. Sandy, would you call the vote?
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbert?
yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes. Item 16 is for a district attorney report. Mr. Moody?
I don't really have a report. I did want to introduce Brad Cascio sitting on the front row there, my partner. He's helping me with
Brad.
some of your work with no additional charge to you, and he's not being charged for coming
Oh,
tonight.
thank you so much.
But in case you happen to can't reach me or need something, or he might show up at one of your meetings or committees, you may see him in the future.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Item 17, is there any committees? I don't think, Sandy, we have.
We're gonna We're gonna try 5:30 on, we gotta meet once a month, so
For the finance committee.
we're gonna try 5:30. We had a huge gap last time, we're gonna try 5:30, see if that works better.
All right? Does that need to be voted on, Sandy? Just set it and it's done, okay? Item 18, probably the most controversial item on the agenda, is a motion to adjourn. Would that be in order?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Mr. Girlinghouse. Second by Mr. Tab Lobel. Any discussion? None being, Sandy, would you call the vote, please?
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Lobel?
Yes.
Mr. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ard?
Yes.
Mr. Talbert?
No.
Mr.
You can
King?
stay.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Wascom?
Yes.
Same.